Since the turn of the century, Polaris has been a player in the big bore sport ATV market. While the other manufacturers were concentrating on making 400cc four-strokes that were legal for racing, Polaris recognized that a larger displacement machine could offer more power and still be easier to ride for the experienced ATVer. When Polaris released the Predator 500 back in 2003, it offered a lot more than open-class displacement. It also featured a wider chassis, aftermarket quality Fox shocks, Maxxis tires, Douglas wheels, and steel-braided brake lines. In the years since, most of the other manufacturers have stepped into the open-class ranks, with very different machines appealing to specific types of rider. In 2006, Polaris released their second manual-shift open-class machine, the Outlaw 500, becoming the first manufacturer in history to produce a sport ATV with independent rear suspension. 1 year later, Polaris released their third open-class machine, an ATV that offered full-on race quad acceleration with smooth and easy-to-use power. Combined with their IRS chassis, the KTM 525 powered Outlaw 525 IRS offered phenomenal trail performance, but wasn't perfect for side-hilling the dunes or for aggressive track riding. Compared to the new Outlaw 525 IRS, the aging Predator was lacking in the power department, so for 2008, Polaris retired the Predator and replaced it with their all-new Outlaw 525S. The new Outlaw features the same KTM 525 motor found in the Outlaw 525 IRS. The motor is cradled in a chassis very similar to the IRS's, right back to where the rear suspension begins. The new 525S features a standard swing arm and solid rear axle, making it more desirable for riders who ride on motocross tracks, in the sand, or for those who simply prefer a traditional rear suspension design. The KTM 525 motor actually measures in at 510 cc's. Instead of having KTM's traditional 6-speed transmission, one of its forward gears was swapped out to make room for a new reverse gear. Reverse gear is activated by pressing on the thumb lever located next to the thumb throttle and shifting down from first gear. We have enjoyed this system since the Predator days. To keep shifting smooth and consistent, the Outlaw features a hydraulic clutch as standard equipment. Feeding air to the carburetor is Polaris's restrictive airbox design. First off, the airbox is tiny, restricting airflow and undoubtedly robbing some power. The smallish filter is difficult to remove and reinstall, making general maintenance a pain. Fortunately, Wrath Racing is working on a fix, which should be available by the time you see this test. This is a mandatory upgrade for anyone who purchases this machine for reliability and to ensure that you are getting all the power that you paid for. The Outlaw fires up easily when cold thanks to its electric starting. However, it is a bit more finicky when hot. Fuel is fed to the motor by a Kian 39mm FCR carburetor. This carburetor is proven to produce good power and eliminates the need to purchase an expensive aftermarket fuel management system necessary to make big power with most fuel-injected machines. The only drawback we found in the FCR is that the carb-mounted choke lever is a real pain to find. No fault of the carburetor, but it's even harder to find the petcock valve used to turn the fuel on and off. The motor is cradled in a tubular steel chassis, which features more rake for the front A-arms than the old Predator did. This helps the suspension better react to small front-end impacts often encountered out on the trail. At 37.5 inches wide, the 525S sits somewhere between the widths, considered ideal for trail riding and motocross racing. The Outlaw features high-quality preload adjustable Fox Podium X shocks up front and a preload, compression, and rebound adjustable shock out back. Wheel travel numbers are impressive, with 10 inches of wheel travel up front and 11 inches in the rear. The rear suspension is a linkageless design, dependent on the rear shock's dual spring setup for progression throughout the travel. Polaris continues to equip their sport machines with exceptional brakes. Steel-braided brake lines are routed to dual-piston calipers up front and a single hydraulic disc in the back. With as much power as the KTM motor produces, we are happy that the brakes appear equally as powerful. The Outlaw's tire and wheel package was spec'd out for the trail, giving the machine 5 inches of ground clearance. 2011-9 Maxxis Racer tires out back and 2710 Razor Front Pro tires up front give you aftermarket quality rubber right off the showroom floor. Tires at both ends are mounted on high-quality spun aluminum wheels. At a claimed dry weight of 375 pounds, the Outlaw is quite light by open class standards. Although the Outlaw is a bit wider than most sport clouds on the market, its length of 50.5 inches and 32-inch seat height are pretty much normal. The first time we cracked the throttle on the Outlaw 525S, we noticed that the power was readily available right off idle. The KTM 525 motor has gobs of torque. Unlike some 450s, which are soft off the bottom and require you to pay attention to gear selection, the Outlaw 525 seems to be unstoppable when chugging along in a high gear. As the motor climbs into the mid-range, things are happening quickly. Trees are whizzing past, almost as fast as your friends you just left in the dust. On top, the power begins to taper off, so you just grab another gear and continue to haul butt. The Outlaw is extremely fast, with no pronounced hit. This makes it easy to dial in the ideal amount of power for any situation from slippery trails to flat-out sand drags. The Outlaw's transmission shifts reasonably well whether you're on the power or not. Its 5-speed transmission is well spaced, although reverse gear is a bit taller than we'd like for backing out of sticky situations. Also, neutral can be tricky to find at times when the motor's running. For hole shots and steep climbs, the Outlaw's front end is lighter than we'd like. Out of the hole, you have to carefully feed in the power with the clutch in order to prevent unwanted wheeling. Steep hill climbs require a lot of body English and careful throttle and clutch control to keep the front end down. On the other hand, this makes it easy to carry the front end high over logs or ditches out on the trail. Mega wheelies are also a snap. The Outlaw is more stable through the turns than the current 400cc machines on the market. We thought its stability was most comparable to the stock Honda TRX 450R. The Outlaw is happiest in tight woods dodging trees with its responsive steering and tight turning radius. High-speed turns require a bit more concentration as the Outlaw sits high in its suspension travel. Good throttle control is once again important when exiting turns, as too much throttle lightens the front wheels causing the machine to push or wheelie. Keep the motor a gear high, and coming out of corners you'll be able to accelerate quickly while keeping the front end on the ground and biting. The Outlaw suspension works okay once you dial it in for your riding environment. For our test ground in the eastern United States, we needed the suspension to be able to eat roots, rocks, and water ruts, while still being able to handle some moderate jumping and pounding through whoops. The stock suspension settings work decent for small to medium-sized hits, but lack the suppleness we wanted for long trail rides and packed badly in the whoops. CT Racing's Alan Knowles recommended that we crank up the preload on the rear shock and zero out both compression and rebound to allow it to react faster and still resist bottoming. This definitely helped the rear end handle better and even helped tame the wheelie issue somewhat. This setup was okay for aggressive trail riding, but could be farther improved upon with a good pair of aftermarket shocks. With the amount of power the Outlaw possesses, big jumps are no problem. Even small bumps in the road can be turned into 25-foot leaps. The Outlaw is pretty predictable launching into the air as long as you're in a good attack position. Hang too far off the back of the machine, and the front end has a tendency to come up. Fortunately, the 525 is easy to maneuver in the air, so in-flight corrections are easily achieved. For steep downhills or slowing from speed, the Polaris has excellent brakes front and rear. Its steel-braided brake lines and dual-piston calipers give the Outlaw all the braking performance you'll ever need. On long rides, the Outlaw's plush-seated handlebars are comfy. Some riders felt that the position of the foot pegs was a bit too far back, making the transition from sitting to standing more difficult once they'd become fatigued. Overall, the ergonomics are pretty spacious and should work for all but the smallest riders. In conclusion, the Outlaw 525S is an ATV that bridges the gap between sport and high-performance machines in the big four ranks. Its motor, brakes, reasonable weight, and frame geometry are of race caliber. While its width isn't perfect for woods or motocross, it's ideal for the rider who wants to ride trails on Saturday and take his machine to the track on Sunday. Add some aftermarket shocks and update the intake, and the Outlaw 525S will completely rock. In stock trim, it's a capable sport machine for the average rider, and a good starting point to build a competitive race machine.